Hey, thanks for tuning in to this video on inspectional reading. First came across inspectional reading in this book by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren. It's called How to Read a Book. It's quite a page turner, and I'm sure many of you have probably encountered this book and perhaps even read it yourself. Inspectional reading is just the idea that before you try to deep dive, analyze an author's book, you want to first inspect the book and get a sense for where the author is going to take you, what the author is going to be doing. And so there's a couple things that you do when you inspectionally read. Now, I'm going to get a little bit in depth, and if you Google search inspectional reading, you can find probably some good summaries that go even more in depth. But if you just want a cheater's approach to inspectional reading, set a timer for 60 minutes and imagine that after that timer goes off, you had to have an intelligent conversation with somebody about the book. And so what would you do if you had to take Natalie Wexler's book or Dan Willingham's book, and in 60 minutes from right now, you had to have an intelligent conversation? So these are both nonfiction books. That's really important. We don't need to treat them like movies or novels. There's no fear of spoilers, so we're going to be bouncing all over these things. You're first going to check out your table of contents and see if you can get a sense of what the author is trying to argue or how the author is going to organize their argument. All right, so for Wexler, it becomes really apparent that she's got 3 parts to her book: the way we teach now, how we got here, and how we can change. All right, so she's doing a present, past, future organization. And the subtitles of the parts look important. All you need is skills. That's part 1. The history behind the content-free curriculum. That's part 2. Creating and delivering a content-focused curriculum. All right. It sounds like she's really into this whole idea of content or knowledge. And she's going to argue that one of our big problems is that we don't teach kids stuff. That's just my prediction, my assumption. Now, I can really quickly confirm or refute that assumption by reading her introduction and her conclusion. The first and last chapters in a nonfiction book almost always contain the encapsulation of what the author is going to try to do. Another place that's good for an inspectional read is the index. You can scan through, look for the names of maybe books that you've read, terms that you've already been thinking about in your practice, and I encourage you to bop in and take a look at different parts of the book. Okay, so the index can be useful. The footnotes or endnotes, in this case, Wexler uses an end note in her book. This can be another thing to just intelligently skim. That's what you're thinking about. You're intelligently skimming. Okay, and you're keeping that timer going for 60 minutes. Your goal is not to understand everything that Wexler says. Your goal is to get an understanding of the territory. And what this is going to allow you to do after that 60 minutes, you're not really going to have that conversation, but you are going to have a grid for attaching what you'll learn in Wexler's book to. You are going to have some added motivation probably to read Wexler, because you'll say, oh, she mentioned Daniel Willingham in that chapter, or oh, that other chapter seemed to be a lot about Lucy Calkins, or whatever. And so you're going to be a little more excited to go back and then do your analytical reading, where you go through the book front to back, you annotate, you try to come to terms with what the author is saying, consider the author's evidence, and then decide where you fall in terms of agreeing or disagreeing with the author. All right, so do an inspectional read of Wexler if you haven't yet. You're going to use the same approach if you're in the Willingham book. It's just his book is structured a lot differently. So for Willingham, the introduction and conclusion are going to give you a huge bang for your buck. He's a cognitive scientist, not a journalist. So she's doing a lot more storytelling in this book and weaving together a narrative, visiting different classrooms and researchers across the country. He's more just identifying, methodically, scientifically, what principles from cognitive science will be most useful for the classroom. I mean, he even goes into, in the intro and conclusion, the four filters that the principles that he selected had to go through in order to be selected for inclusion into the book. So you're going to do the same thing with Willingham. Intro, conclusion, hit your index, your endnotes, and then just bop around in the book until that 60-minute timer goes off. And like I said, it's not a novel. Don't feel scolded if you're bouncing all over the place and skipping chapters and things. During an inspectional read, the goal is not comprehensive or analytical reading. We're inspecting something. We're trying to get a basic framework for what we're going to read. Okay, have I said bouncing all around or basic framework enough? Probably I have, which means I can now let you go. And before you do anything else with your book that you've selected, do an inspectional read. And then, at your leisure, dive into an analytical reading throughout the rest of your summer. All right, thank you for watching this video. Take care. And by the way, if you want to discuss the book or anything that you're reading in these books before our synchronous meetings, feel free to email anytime. I'm happy to discuss.